We interrupt this pandemic crisis and election for an important news announcement. The news that you receive from the news may not be as accurate as you think. And in a pandemic crisis, what you don't know may hurt you. In 1963, the year of the Kennedy assassination, Bull Connor and the protests and the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, former Washington Post publisher Philip Graham delivered an address to Newsweek correspondents where he said of the vaunted Fourth Estate that they were entrusted with the duty to write the first draft of history. And if that is where history is stored, that is a great responsibility, and a burning necessity arises to get it right the first time. And for those who wonder where the Washington Post name came from, it is quite interesting that it is the name of the tune that soldiers actually march to when they conduct inspection of troops in the Pass and Review, the Washington Post. But folks inside the Beltway may recall back in January 7th to be exact, when our weather scientists, meteorologists, put out an all-points alert regarding an approaching winter snowstorm, a blizzard, and immediately government agencies and schools were closed in the Washington area, creating rush hour traffic in the middle of the day, as panicked people began to flee to escape the possibility of being locked in and unable to escape. But perhaps the gods of weather were Orson Welles fans, because if you recall, just like his War of the Worlds, Martians that panicked the sophisticated city of New York, the snowflakes never fell, and all we got were the shoes. So much for that AccuWeather forecast, and that's supposed to be the real scientists on the news, meteorologists. Maybe a meteor is coming. Back in the 80s, in the movie Broadcast News, starring an intelligent and ambitious character played by Holly Hunter, and a bumbling idiot with television appeal played by William Hurt, at least the folks in Hollywood were saying that everyone on television broadcast news is just a salesman. And not long before in the movie Network, we even found one fed-up newsman telling everyone to get up from their sofa, go to the window to scream with him that I'm fed up and I'm not going to take it anymore. But the old school journalists, even then, looked to the great investigative reporters like Woodward and Bernstein at the Washington Post, who actually looked nothing like Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman, and continue to herald the fierce dedication and ethics in print journalism. That's where the real journalism is. In fact, if you want to break into journalism, believe it or not, you're going to have to punch your clock at least a little time working the beat at a local newspaper or gazette newsletter. Maybe even a job as low as a copy setter to learn the ropes of column inches, reverse pyramids, and all of the other techniques in the art of journalism. And some of the big thinkers, even Virginia State Attorney General Mark Herring, don't go grab a scientific report to figure out the ins and outs of pandemic infection spread, but actually rely on the stories that are printed by the journalists in the newspapers, most of whom are not even scientists. But they know some of the lingo and can make it sound good enough for simple folks to understand, pressed for time and looking for headlines to stay informed. And one of the headline stories in the pandemic crisis that was found during lockdown litigations on facial coverings had a great headline in the Washington Post, a leading national newspaper. Progressive leaning, spate of new research supports wearing masks to control coronavirus spread. This story promoting the wearing of masks was the combined effort of three Washington Post reporters who contributed a lot of breaking news on the pandemic for that newspaper with the slogan banner that says democracy dies in darkness, a phrase with which most would probably agree. Good marketing, but in this story, with the bold headline that said, spate of new research supports wearing masks to control coronavirus spread, a catchy headline that was so great that it was picked up for syndication in several other newspapers coast to coast. From Boston to San Francisco, what exactly did Ben Guarino, Chelsea James, and Ariana Yunjun Cha, the resident experts on pandemic science, actually have to tell us about these facial coverings and their magical qualities that fail to protect Ralph Northam, who told us that even a bandana could prevent the microbial particles from infecting you, albeit contrary to the opinion of folks at the New York Times, who explicitly rejected that ludicrous proposition and any suggestions that one-ply cotton was impervious to penetration by nanoparticles. Well, one of the first things that they wrote in the story that appeared to lead with the idea that the science of masks has become partisan, and basically if you reject masks, you are probably ignorant and Republican voting for the president, buried about 8 paragraphs down, they actually admit that even real scientists who actually do the research and the experiments, who are probably not supporters of the president statistically, agree that the studies don't settle the question of whether the protective benefit of face masks derives from the barrier it creates or from the behavior changes it might prompt. The mask could simply remind people not to touch their faces or serve as a visual reminder of a dangerous virus lurking. And Ralph has said many times that symbols are important. Wait, it's not the mask that protects me, but the behavior it may encourage me to repeat in my daily routine? What happens if I get the wrong idea about the mask and think that it's super protection against things? Isn't that a potential danger of wearing a mask? Nonetheless, whatever they said, it's way different from what the headline appeared to say about the super qualities of facial covering. And if you are not a scientist, just one paragraph down, they actually tell you that wearing N95 respirators compared with disposable surgical masks or reusable cotton masks was more strongly associated with a reduction in risk of infection. Wow, a medical grade mask is more protective than this piece of cotton I have on my face. Well, if you needed a study to tell you that, don't feel bad, because Dr. Stephen Herron, director of the Alexandria City Health Department, recently told the press that he needed a study to determine if facial coverings, which the CDC has stated clearly, provide a simple barrier to prevent the contaminated droplets in your breath from infecting others, or which, used in a term called source control, work as effectively outside, as we have known for years, as they do inside. He actually needed a study to tell him that. And he's not just a scientist, but also a doctor in charge of all health during a pandemic, unprecedented in a suburb of the nation's capital. Why am I not getting a warm and fuzzy feeling about the doctor in charge in Alexandria? But the top science prize today goes to Michelle Bornstein, the religion reporter for the Washington Post, who wrote the story about the death of Bishop Gerald Glenn, the Pentecostal pastor who she claimed had ignored the orders of the nation's only doctor serving as a governor, and further had profaned science by stating that God is larger than this dreaded virus, and had reaped the vengeance of defiance, dying from COVID-19 before Easter. But for a moment, let's just read this extortionate appeal that appears to have placed most faith leaders in Virginia in reasonable apprehension of death or grave bodily harm if they dared to break the law or challenge science. According to this scientific argument that Ms. Bornstein presents, Glenn preached in church about the virus in March, before he became sick, encouraging people not to be afraid. On March 22nd, 5 days after Virginia Governor Ralph Northam D. had urged people to avoid non-essential gatherings of more than 10 people, Glenn told his congregation that I firmly believe that God is larger than this dreaded virus, according to a video played April 6th by Richmond station WTVR. Ms. Bornstein adds to this story an interview with the daughter of the deceased bishop, where she said her father's encouraging, well-populated March 22nd service was held not to disrespect officials, but to support those who were scared. She said her parents were both very affectionate. Mom and dad are hugging type people. That's what they do. They hug everyone. And Miss Borstein goes on to strengthen this argument by stating on March 23rd, Northam ordered non-essential businesses closed and banned all gatherings of more than 10 people. And that is a pretty stern rebuke for babes in faith. This is a child who lost her father, being interviewed to defend her father's decision to practice his faith in a weekly devotional service, and being compelled to explain that her father meant no disrespect. But if you were to take a look at the order that was actually published, as Ms. Bornstein says, 5 days before the March 22nd worship service, that's 22 minus 5. Let me think. 21, 20, 19, 18, 17. March 17th. You will clearly see that that order that she used to rebuke this poor child, as even Northam has admitted, on March 17, 2020, I, along with the Virginia State Health Commissioner, issued an order of the Governor and State Health Commissioner declaration of public health emergency, later amended, limiting the number of patrons in restaurants, fitness centers, and theaters to no more than 10 per establishment. Is a church a restaurant? I mean, they do serve communion with bread and wine. Today I can go to a restaurant and take off my mask when I want to eat. Is a church a fitness center? They do a lot of exercise in some churches but today when I go to a fitness center and get on the running machine, I can take off my mask. Is a church a theater? Can I get an amen? So Miss Borstein demanded an apology from a grieving child who lost her father for breaking a law that wasn't broken? Why? In fact, contrary to Ms. Bornstein's report, even the April 7th guidance from the governor to faith leaders states clearly that under Executive Order 55, the stay-at-home order that was not published until March 30th, 7 days, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, or an entire week after March 23rd, the judgment day reported by Ms. Borstein, places of worship that conduct in-person services were only then required to limit gatherings to 10 people to comply with the statewide 10-person ban. However, given the extreme risk to public health, Virginians were strongly encouraged to seek alternative means of attending religious services, such as virtually streaming from home, a capability that only 1/5 of Christian churches had across the nation, or via drive-in or drive-through worship. And Executive Order 53, the one that Ms. Borstein, the religion reporter, references in her article, only concerns businesses that are restaurants, campgrounds, fitness centers, and theaters. Or maybe that is how the Washington Post defines worship in church. Cheap entertainment. Let the church say, do I amuse you? Now turn to your neighbor and tell Ms. Bornstein to do the math. This is particularly concerning because according to the Pew Research Center, just like African Americans are, by statistics, the most religious demographic in America, and far more likely to interpret the scriptures as literal. So be very, very careful when you start talking about people being backwards for believing that the earth is 7,000 years old. They are also more likely than others to blindly accept on faith what they read or hear in the news as Holy Writ. And Ms. Borstein, the religion reporter for the Progressive Washington Post, has been weighed by the scales and found wanting. Alarmingly, in a pandemic time when 24% of persons, according to Pew Research, formally affiliated with any church began for the very first time in their life to consider the power of prayer. It is interesting when reviewing what the Founding Fathers actually spoke about the press, adding it as only a small footnote and after mention to the rights to free speech, or the press, as it says in the First Amendment. But in Federalist 51, James Madison, a Virginian who noted that not all men are angels, had actually contemplated that churches and the various sects might form an extra republic to form the conscience of a people. John Adams believed we're necessitated to be both religious and moral because of our Constitution that was not suited for any other kind of people. And at the very beginning of Federalist 53, he wrote the words, "I shall here perhaps be reminded of a current observation that where annual elections end, tyranny begins." My name is Mike Webb, Major Mike Webb, and I am running for U.S. Congress with liberty, honor, and excellence. By God, we shall make America great again. Honest. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.